Now, millets are getting lots of press about how healthy they are, how environmentally friendly they are, how they can grow with little water, little care, little fertilizer, and so on and so forth. And we always get into this tizzy about things as if they are a silver bullet to our climate change problem. Plant 1 trillion trees and save the world kind of ideas. So I had wanted to cover millet farming somehow, and fortunately, this article from Mongabay came along, the hidden side of millet farming, and obviously these are not peer-reviewed articles, but Mongabay generally does a good job. So if you just think of credibility and salience and legitimacy, I trust this media, so I'm going to use this as well for reporting this on millets and their potential pros and cons. From difficulties in processing crops after harvest to changing rainfall patterns and lack of policy and institutional support, millet farmers face significant challenges. Despite being touted as a climate resilient crop, a growing body of research points to the fact that climate change also impacts millets. Increasing temperatures are resulting in lower yields of some millet varieties. So they are not naturally as climate resilient as we imagine, maybe. More detailed studies for adaptive practices conserving diverse varieties and establishing an improved local purchase mechanism are needed to address some of the key concerns with millets. So those are the key findings from this report, and you can skip the rest if you want. Here is a nice picture of sorghum in India. This is called something else, maybe jawar or bajra or one. I'm always confused. My native language is Kannada and it has one name, then the national language Hindi has another name, and then there is an English name. So I'm not always sure if I'm not a biologist, as you know by now. In 2024, when independent food researcher and writer Shivani Unakar, I don't know how it's pronounced, Unakar or Unakar, visited the Man Taluka in Satara, Maharashtra, she learned from local millet farmers that insufficient rainfall had delayed the germination of the jawar. Okay, so you go. Jawar is sorghum, and the farmers were very concerned, but towards the end of my trip, a heavy bout of rainfall lasted for 2 to 3 days. Although it saved the crop, the farmers later informed me that they could only get 60% of their regular harvest shares Unkar. So we work in another district, another village of Satara district. Satara is a funny district because it has very high rainfall, more than 5 meters of rain on the western Ghats side of the district, and then it drops off to few hundred millimeters. So the range is large, and then the classification of the district comes off as water surplus, even though there are farmers in the villages where we work are really desperate for water. Unkar frequently interacts with millet farmers for her research, and as the coordinator for the Pune-based Great State Ale Works Millet Beer Project, I have been to this place, Great State Ale Work, a little place, very nice microbrews. In addition to changing rainfall patterns, she has witnessed how farmers also struggle with labor issues and a lack of dedicated markets for their crops. Sorry about that. She adds that these concerns are often not a part of the larger narratives that focus on these grains. A lot of what we hear is that millets are great for nutrition, great for land, and for the soil, and require very little water. But I'm sure if the average consumer understands the complexities, I am not sure if the average consumer understands the complexities behind the scenes, she says. Millets have been found to have a lower carbon footprint compared to major crops like rice and wheat, just because mass production of rice and wheat tends to be very intensive with water use, fertilizer use, land use, and so on, whereas millets are still kind of a boutique crop when it's done by rich farmers for rich customers, but when subsistence farmers do it, it's typically rain-fed agriculture, as we just saw here. Keeping that in mind, depending on the variety, they also provide a range of benefits such as drought tolerance, the ability to grow in saline and less fertile soils, and more disease resistance. Yet, as Unekar posits, documenting on-ground challenges. I don't know why I'm having trouble reading this morning. Yet, as Unekar posits, documenting the on-ground challenges of growing millets and the impacts of climate variabilities on the crops is vital, as it will influence the future growth trends for these grains. So, reducing millet cultivation then, according to a 2023 news report, area under millet cultivation in Karnataka has reduced from 21 lakh hectares in 2017-18 to 16 lakh hectares in 2022-23, along with a decrease in production from 32 lakh tons to 21 lakh tons during the same period. A lakh is 100,000 in Indian lingo. About 2 decades ago, we were regular cultivators of little millet or samai. Around 2008, we stopped growing the crop because harvesting was very challenging, and then processing the harvested grain was also difficult. Now we only grow navane or navan, I don't know how it's pronounced in the local languages, foxtail millet, and ragi, which is finger millet. I know this. I ate a lot of this when growing up, and even now I love it. But they are not as separate crops, but mixed with, they are not to be grown as separate crops, but mixed with maize, which is foxtail millet, along with borders of other crops. We get around 2-3 bags, which is sufficient for our use, says Lakshmi Lokur, a third generation farmer in Belgaum, Karnataka. In case you don't know, Lakshmi is a name of a female. There are some people called Lakshmi Singh, Lakshmi Kumar, and so on, but this is a woman, and there are lots of female farmers. So when we go to villages and have meetings with farmers, it's nice to see a fair number of women farmers in the group as well. Owing to the small size of the grain, Lokur explains that isolating the little millet from all the debris such as crop residues, stones, and other dust particles is a laborious task. Traditionally, the older women in the family would perform the task of segregating the grains, so they would sit during the day and segregate the grains. Even if we use machinery, dehusking the millet still needed manual intervention, making it challenging to get labor for the post-harvest processes, says Lokur. Farm labor issues are complicated in India because there are certain governmental programs that pay people who are not employed to do things, and that tends to be sometimes better than what a farmer can pay for this kind of post-harvest work. So it's always difficult to find labor. The same challenge persists for other millet varieties too. While finger and pearl millet and sorghum are naked grains, others like foxtail, little kodo, porso, barnyard, and brown top millet have an outer husk that needs to be removed, making the post-harvest process more cumbersome. According to a report by the independent think tank Observer Research Foundation (ORF), which writes a lot of reports, in the last 5 decades, India has lost 56% of its area under millet cultivation, but the overall production has increased from 11.3 to 16.9 million tons. This increase in production is attributed to the availability of robust technologies and the release of improved cultivars. While this may seem like an antithesis to the observations outlined above, these overarching numbers do not reveal the variations with respect to individual millets. Additionally, a 2024 review article by researchers across institutions in India shares that between 1963 and 2020, the increase in productivity kilogram per hectare for both pearl millet and wheat is similar, about 244% for pearl millet, 271% increase for wheat. But a lack of demand and policy support has reduced the cultivation of pearl millet, diverting the land for crops like cotton, maize, and legumes. Right now, millet is coming back, but as a luxury item for rich people, like an organic food fad. For sorghum, the overall productivity increase is less compared to other crops and millets, and production has also reduced from 9.1 million tons to between 1963 to 67. to down at 4.36 million tons between 2015 and 2020. Area under sorghum cultivation has also come down by more than 85%. Okay, so let's look at some numbers here from a report in 2024. Productivity of major food crops in India comparing 1963-67 to 2015-20. Remember, at that time, monsoon or the Kharif season was the major grain producers, but in 2015 to 2020, loss of irrigation and so on have also started to create second cropping season called the Rabi, the northeast monsoon period as well. And now the production from Kharif, summer monsoon and Rabi are almost the same in some places and for some crops. Okay, so land area, you can see the numbers here. I cut off the details here, but just look at relatively. Rice is massive, wheat, so you can just think of these as percentages. Rice, wheat, maize, finger millet, pearl millet, sorghum and small millet. But if you compare to the recent period, you have rice has grown more, nearly 50% from about 36%. Wheat has grown to over 30%, and maize remains the same, it's still used a lot. Finger millet has dropped, pearl millet has dropped, sorghum has dropped significantly, and small millets have almost disappeared. So that's for land area. Production in millets, production in, this is million hectares, millions of hectares, not percentages, sorry. This is in million tons production. Rice has jumped, wheat has jumped, corresponding to the area increase and intensified post-green revolution, fertilizer applications, irrigation and so on. You can see maize has jumped, but the rest of them have remained almost same or even dropped. Sorghum has dropped here, for example. Pearl millet has gone up and small millets have almost disappeared again. So this is productivity in terms of kilograms per hectare. Obviously intensified agriculture yields have grown for all of them, so that's good news. If we can maintain their production, then we can grow more per acre. Okay, activist, researcher and founder of the Millet Foundation, Dwijendra Nath Guru explains that even at the nascent stage that the millet market is in, it has not received the kind of institutional, financial and policy support that other crops like paddy, wheat, maize and soybean were provided with during their promotional years. Soybean became a massive cash crop as well, like cotton, sugarcane and so on. The lack of established markets and processes are the primary concerns for farmers cultivating millets. Guru's observations are also echoed in a 2024 report by the Tata Cornell Institute, which highlights that millet farmers on average receive profits of only 33 to 42% of what wheat and paddy farmers get for their crops. So unless you're subsistence farmers, this is not going to work in terms of economics. Additionally, the annual production costs for millets are also increasing at a rate of 1.2% per quintal of the grain, that's 100 kilograms, adding to the farmers' woes. In 2020, Maungabe India reported on how India's attempts to increase millet cultivation have popularized a few millet candidates like finger millet, although the challenges of processing and the cost of cultivation were prevalent issues. Further, 2023 was declared the International Year of Millets by the Food and Agricultural Organization (FAO) and the United Nations, increasing a global awareness about the grain. While this has led to a lot of value addition and created excitement for millets in general, the need of the hour is infrastructural support for small and marginal farmers who mainly cultivate the crop, shares Arun Kaulige, the director and co-founder of Kaulige Foods Private Limited. There is a disconnect between the kind of millet-based products we see in the markets and the ongoing challenges of farming communities. Farmers need much more support, more mechanization and equipment that should be available to them at their doorstep. Even if they can semi-process the grains, they would get a much better price for their crops, adds Kaulige. The climate factor, while While the on-ground challenges are the primary deterrents for farmers to consider millets for their fields, a limited but growing body of research also points to the fact that these climate-smart grains need some protection from climate variabilities. In 2024 report that examines the impacts of climate change on food production, Deputy Editor Hannah Ritchie of Our World in Data explains that under conditions of increased carbon dioxide, higher temperatures, and altered rainfall patterns, crops respond differently depending on type and location. For example, while increased atmospheric carbon dioxide increases the growth of crops like rice and wheat, the impact is much less on crops like millet and sorghum. These crops only benefit under water stress conditions. So if everybody is water stressed, then millet may come out on top. But if you are irrigating and there are no rules or limitations, then obviously farmers have to choose based on the livelihoods and income. Similarly, a meta-analysis of several studies showed that when there is a 40 to 50% reduction in water availability, yield declines were much lower for crops like wheat when compared to millets and sorghum. Under waterlogged conditions, yield declines for millets and sorghum were more compared to wheat and maize, which is not good news, okay, especially with changing climate. So to come closer to the end, impact of water availability on crops. These are C3 crops shown in red and C4 crops shown in blue. So C3, C4 are, in case you don't know, photosynthetic pathways that have evolved over the thousands of years, let's say. Wheat, actually more than that. Wheat, they used to be wild grass and then we obviously started cultivating them. Wheat is here. So we are looking at yield declines in negative numbers. Wheat is around negative 20%. Rice has a large range, but around 25% or so. Maize jumps to almost 40%. Millets are at over 38%, and sorghum is at around 28-29%. So you can see that yield losses for rice and wheat are much lower in terms of water availability. If you look at water logging impacts, wheat loses 25%, maize more than that at about 26-27%. Millet has a large range but can be as high as 50% or more, even 80% here at the outer edge, and sorghum can range from just about 10% loss to 75% loss, with the median value here at about 48%. Okay, so another 2020 study by the faculty members at the University of Delhi that looked at the impact of climate variabilities on sorghum and pearl millet cultivation between 1966 and 2011 showed that sorghum yields increased by 3 kg per hectare per 100 millimeter increase in rainfall, while the average fell by 45 kg per hectare per degree increase in temperatures. So, there is a PI curve that has a peak optimum temperature. If you warm more than that, yields will drop. And for pearl millet, temperature increases above 24.5 degrees C negatively impacted the yields. Analysis of a more recent data set, millet yields between 1991 and 2020, showed that a 1% increase in average annual temperatures led to a 3.06% decrease in millet yields. So that's massive. Vincent Guérin, a biostatistician at CIRAD, French Agricultural Research Center for International Development. So it's Centre International anyway. Montpellier is where it is, and former postdoctoral research fellow, Francois, at the International Crops Research Institute for Semi-Arid Tropics or ICRISAT in Hyderabad, India, explains that there is limited research on the impact of climate change on millets compared to more mainstream and economically profitable crops like wheat or maize. So as these become more advocated and popular, research will go up as well. Since millets are naturally resilient to harsher climatic conditions, they may be viewed as a response to climate change. Stakeholders may assume that millets already serve as an effective adaptation strategy to climate change, leading them to focus their efforts on crops with low resilience to harsh environments. Additionally, studying climate change and crop adaptation is highly complex and requires sophisticated experiments, large and heterogeneous data sets, and advanced methodological tools to analyze data. As with many complex research areas, these efforts are more advanced in major crops with greater financial support, explains Gara. However, progress is also emerging in millet research, benefiting from advancements made in other crops. In his research, Gara used, you see my French pronunciation, crop model simulations, agronomical and environmental data to analyze existing pearl millet cultivation areas in the country, classified into three zones. So Gara classified crop model simulations into three zones based on rainfall and soil type, and proposed new cultivation zones in East Rajasthan and Haryana and Northwest India that are more suited to withstand climate variabilities. Okay, though Rajasthan has very little rain, Haryana is a part of the breadbasket of India, but a lot of water mining, groundwater mining. A graph from Vincent Gara's research that classifies India's pearl millet cultivation areas into three zones based on rainfall and soil type. A1 for arid regions in Rajasthan, A for semi-arid regions in north and central India, and B for semi-arid regions with heavy soils in South India. The A zone is further broken down into three sub-zones: G zone encompassing Gujarat, AE1 covering East Rajasthan and Haryana, and AE2 covering Uttar Pradesh. Why am I reading this? Because we are looking at a figure next. Of these, AE1 is identified as the core of India's pearl millet production, with significant yield increases due to favorable climate and soil conditions, along with improved pearl millet varieties. Okay, here is a map that Gara produced. Original environmental classifications were A1, A, B, whereas he has gone into more details. You can see the finer classification, especially in these regions. This red band has been now split into multiple colors. This red has gone to this color, so you have now A1, AE1, AE2, G and B. You can go and read the details, but basically you get the idea that research is increasing. How to adapt to the new seasons then? Lokur, the Belgaum female farmer Lakshmi, adds that there have also been adaptations at the farm level, such as segregating areas for crops as changes in rainfall patterns are delaying harvests and subsequent sowing cycles. Ragi and Navane are cultivated in areas where we have no plans to sow a second crop. Even if there are rainfall delays, further cropping cycles are not impacted by them. So they are not doing Rabi, they are only doing one crop cycle. Ruth DeFries, Professor of Ecology and Sustainable Development at Columbia University and co-founding Dean of the Columbia Climate School, New York, shares that not only are farmers well aware of the ecological benefits of cultivating millets, they also know how to sustain these crops under various conditions. DeFries notes how indigenous farmers in central India cultivate millet varieties like kodo and small millets on sloping lands, as too much rain can have a negative impact on these crops, so slopes will make sure that the water flows off and not get waterlogged. Bongo Bay, India also reported on how farming communities in Koli Hills, Tamil Nadu, where maybe that's pronounced Koli Hills, I don't know, were cultivating shorter duration millets to overcome the long dry summer spells. The key to resilience to climate variability is diversity, so that some crops can adapt. This is why conserving genetic diversity in types and varieties of millets is crucial with seed banks and in situ conservations, says DeFries. Guru adds that monocropping approach to millets will pave the way for the same issues encountered with other major crops, such as soil nutrition depletion and lack of biodiversity. He also makes a case for creating localized systems in the millet market. To address some of the key concerns with millets, local buying mechanisms must be established by promoting local consumption rather than centralized procurement. Similarly, while looking at cultivation related issues and seed varieties, we need to look at local varieties rather than promoting the bulk produced institutional seeds. There are other articles related. More climate literacy and diversification could help tribal millet farmers adapt to impacts and so on. But basically, I just want to add, when you talk about diversity in millets, there are anecdotal stories of how villagers used to save varieties of millet seeds that could be harvested in 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, because they could use the appropriate variety based on when the rainfall onset happened in the monsoon season. As you know, if it happens in June, you get 4 months of rainfall, and if it's delayed, you may get 3 months or 2 months, and so on. And that kind of knowledge is being lost also because a lot of the kids leave the villages because making a living as a farmer is a nightmare, and they would rather go to urban, peri-urban centers and live as taxi drivers or delivery boys and so on, leaving the village life behind. So these are obviously very complicated issues, and it's not just about crops and crop selections and sustained yields and so on. There is also a human dimension to it about just how to sustain or incentivize people to stay in farming. Okay, so let's leave this here for now.